Hallå allihop, välkomna hit. Jag heter Mark Eisit, jag är journalist och skriver för Göteborgs-Posten, bland andra om arkitektur och stadsplanering, residence, gör lite radio numera. Jag är här för att moderera en del utav möbelveckans event. And we're switching to English because Michael Anastassiades is here with us. And the title of this talk is Learning Through Practice.
Yeah.
But it could equally well have been called Learning Through Subtraction or Reduction or Distillation, because Michael is really a master of the minimal. If you look at what he is able to produce, he's self-manufacturing jewellery, furniture, lighting. It's very difficult to imagine anyone being able to reduce those objects any further, because if you did, they would almost not exist. But they have a great physical and poetic presence still. So please, Michael, you will be talking for about half an hour,
Sure.
and then we'll have a little chat afterwards.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Mark.
welcome.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you.
I just want to talk to you briefly, a little bit about where I come from and how I ended up where I am at this moment. I grew up in Cyprus, and I went to school there. And then after that, finishing my military service, I ended up in London to study. I trained as a civil engineer. Graduated, and then realized after my studies that this was not what I wanted to be. And a lot of the things that I did after that throughout my career was actually not really knowing what I wanted to do, but at least one thing that was good, that I knew what I didn't want to do. So I started ending up where I wanted to be simply through a process of elimination. So I graduated in 1993 from the Royal College of Art. I did a master's course in design. I had only 2 years of design education, and felt very much that after my studies that I didn't really train properly as a designer. I was interested in doing something creative, but I used the years right after graduating from college to discover what I really wanted, how I wanted to contribute into the world of design. So this is my graduation project. It was done in 1993. It's a message cup. It's a recording cup that you use to record and play back messages, and you exchange messages with the people that you share the same household. They're not for drinking, they're just simply for recording messages. You have to imagine the time when this was done was 93, was right at the beginning with all this mobile communication, sort of texting was new, and so the whole idea is that you would pick up a person's cup, you would talk to it, leave them their message, and put it upside down on the table. When the person would come home, would find the cup upside down, they know there is a message. Just by simply turning it upright, they would hear the message. So it was an interesting way to explore that notion of communication in the domestic environment. Shortly afterwards, I did this table, which is an alarm clock table. It's a bedside table, which is metal. 2 of its legs are shorter than the others, and you lift up, there is a lid on the top. You lift the lid up, and then you put the dials, the hands, as to the time that you want to wake up. And when that time comes, the table starts vibrating. So it rocks from side to side, and it causes any objects that you put on it to fall down and wake you up. A little bit later, I did the anti-social light. It's a living room light that glows only when there's absolute silence. So the idea is that you have to really respect its peculiar behavior in order to get its function, and which means its illumination. So what would happen if you talk around it? The light starts dimming down slowly, and then you have to establish silence again in order for it to go up. So it's a light that glows and works only when there's absolute silence. And then I did another one which has exactly the opposite function, which is called the social light. And it's a light that actually needs to be talked to maintain its glow. So if you stop talking, it stops working. And it's more like a therapy object to talk your frustrations to, like a companion. At the same time, I started working with this design duo, Dan and Raby. And they were colleagues of mine. They were teaching at the Royal College at the time when I was studying. The first project that we developed was called Weeds, Aliens, and Other Stories. It was an experimental project inspired by people's obsession with gardens and their plants. So, you know, how people talk to them in order to encourage the glow and the whole mystery around the world of plants. And this object, these are wooden labels that you see there. They are electronic labels that read poems and recipes to your plants when you're away on holiday. I mean, the idea of recipes is quite interesting because at that time when we were developing the project, we discovered a book called From Garden to Kitchen. So half the book was about how you nurture your plants and how you grow your plants. And then half of the book was recipes on how to cook them and what you're going to do with the plants that you spend the whole life, you know, looking after and bringing them up. So we like that kind of barbaric relationship that existed there. This is called Cricket Box. It's a drawer on a stick that you put under a tree at night. And by opening it, it starts recording cricket sounds. And then you bring it back home and you lean it against the wall and you hear the sound of the crickets. This is called Cucumber Sandwiches. It's a living room table where you grow the perfectly straight cucumber. So there's a glass cone, which you faintly see on the slide. So when the cucumber is a baby, you can see you plant the cucumber seeds in the drawer and you water it, and when the cucumber is a baby, you just simply slip it through this glass cone tube, and it grows perfectly straight. And then when it's ripe and mature, you just simply cut it and eat it. This is a garden horn for whispering to a specific flower or plant you want to talk to. And this is a garden fence for when you have a fight with your partner. You sit on either side of the fence and you negotiate. So you have it without having to see each other. So it's derived from neighborly relationships and how difficult those can be. This is a bench to share with flowers. And lastly, this object, which is called the Rustling Branch. You clip a branch from a tree, you put it in the hole, and then randomly the branch, there is a motor attached to the branch, and then it starts vibrating randomly. So you get the sound of the rustling leaves rather than actually the beauty of a flower or the scent of a flower. This project that we did was a huge success, and it was interesting because it was just raising questions about what design should be. Not many people were exploring that route of design, and it was something that I was very much interested in. We decided to continue and do another project called Design for Fragile Personalities in Anxious Times. And it's a group of therapy objects to help you get over your contemporary fears, you know, like phobias that you have. So this one is called Priscilla, and it's a huggable atomic explosion. So it's like a cuddly toy, which is obviously made up from this picture of this experimental atomic explosion in Nevada in 1956. And the idea is that you hold and hug that mushroom, helps you get over your fear for nuclear war. This one is an atomic explosion in ocean. And we made a huge living room cushion covered in a mohair fabric as a replica. And the idea is that you lie on this piece of furniture. Then this is a series of hideaway furniture pieces, is to hide inside from the fear of being abducted. So they're made out of parquet flooring, so they disguise themselves on the floor, and they look like sealed objects completely. But what happens is that you hide inside, but not in fear, not in a fetal pose, but in a leisure position. So you look like you're actually comfortable and enjoying yourself. So there's complete irony behind the function of hiding because of fear. So this one was derived from this position from Goya's Maya. And you can see the details here. Another one where you lie inside with your legs up in the air and your hands behind your head. And you see how they open in quite sophisticated ways. And they're lined inside with felt in order to muffle the sounds so that you don't get discovered. And this is another one. This is the third one of the series. And then we extended that project and we named it, Do You Want to Replace the Existing Normal? This is extending the idea of therapy objects. It's called, this piece is actually electronic. You buy the box, which is exploded in this picture, and you plug it into the wall. You type in your date of birth, your place of birth, and what it does, it scans your astrological data, and it looks for perfect moments in your life for you to act upon love. So that moment might have passed, or that moment might be around the corner, or in a few years. You don't really know. But when that moment comes, the box actually explodes in your living room, and this pink inflatable crystal inflates in your room. So you arrive home, you find that crystal structure, and you think, okay, this is the day. I have to get out there. So this one is an object to help you get over your addiction to porn. It's a DVD. You put the porn DVD inside the player, and you hold this silicone hose that you hold it in your hands around those two rings, which sense your excitement, your galvanic skin response. And so when you watch porn, then what happens, it senses your excitement and it starts pixelating the screen. So you can't actually see anything. So you have to train yourself to calm down in order to get a clear picture again. So somehow you need to watch the porn without any excitement. So that's a means of therapy for this addiction. This one is called Statistical Clock. It's quite a dark object. It basically scans live news data connected to the internet, and it looks for deaths, for accidents, for fatalities. So if there is a plane crash, there is a channel which has different fatalities, like car crashes, friendly fires. And when a plane crashes, it scans the internet and finds the news. And then if you know that there's so many people that died, then it starts counting the number of dead people. So it's like a statistical clock. With that, what we wanted to communicate is the fact that it's very unlikely that this is going to happen. And you are in your living room to experience it. So, that's what we wanted to bring across to people. This one is called Risk Watch, and it's a watch that whispers to your ear the level of risk in that particular location that you are at any moment in time. So there's a scale from 1 to 5, and by simply putting that watch to your ear, close to your ear, it whispers a number. And that is the magical number, because in this day and age, you don't really know what's happening around the corner. There could be a terrorist attack around you, or there could be something, and then usually what happens is that you never discover it, and the news do, and so you know when you need to evacuate. So this took me through quite a big experimental part of my career, exploring the notion of how I saw design at the time. I was trying to sort of really to make, not make statements necessarily, but somehow address things in a different way. I mean, I didn't see my role as making beautiful objects or things or for industrial production, but more making, raising questions, I would say. At that time, I bought my place in Waterloo in central London, and it's a small, modest, terraced house in a market street. I have a small shop, which I use as a gallery. And I started going through the process of fixing it for many years. For about 3-4 years, I was doing my house. And I realized a lot of the things that I needed, I couldn't actually find in the market. And I wanted to make them myself. And through that passion that I had for objects and beautiful things, I started making my work. I started making my first pieces, that later on I carried them through to production, like this piece here, which is a tube chandelier. These are some interior shots of my house in London. Sometimes I use it to have exhibitions. I also receive clients there by appointment. So people, when they visit in London, they can actually call and make an appointment and come and see the place, because the studio is located on the ground floor. You can see here some furniture pieces that I developed for the space, and then my lights and the mirror there. And it has a beautiful view to the train station and the trains, and also in the backdrop you can see the London Eye. It's the stairs that go down to the basement. At the same time, I started traveling a lot to India. And Mark and I will speak briefly about this after the talk. I had met an architect called Bijoy Jain, who is the main architect behind Studio Mumbai. And we became very good friends. He briefly came from the US after he was working with Richard Meyer, and briefly made a stop in London where we met and we started working on a project together. And then immediately, like 2 years later, he went to Mumbai. He set up his practice there, and then he came back a few years later and took me over. And he wanted me to work with him on projects, brainstorming, and also started asking me to make objects for his interiors. So as you can see here, my lights became the main lights that he used for all his interior projects. And he was a catalyst. He was a person that actually encouraged me, because after I started exploring this idea of industrial production, I realized that it was a very difficult circle to penetrate, in a sense, like approaching manufacturers and trying to convince them about your ideas. So that's when the questions came up in my head, is that if nobody actually is going to grab you and put you somewhere, you have to really earn your way and prove yourself. So there was no other way than actually going into self-production and self-manufacturing, because otherwise nobody will ever see what you're capable of. So these are some pictures of my first production in 2007 when I set up the brand, Michael Anastassiades, and these are the main key pieces photographed in my own house. The mobile chandeliers. We have about 12 models to date, and the collection is still expanding. So a lot of these pieces are, I don't see them as isolated designs. I see them as a language that actually evolves. So we developed a system or a way of putting these pieces together, which is quite intricate. There's about 70 to 80 components in every single piece. So by simply unscrewing the piece, you can flat pack it, ship it somewhere else, and just simply screwing it together, it lights up. So they're quite magical. The MC9 here, the copper mirrors, which is a limited edition of pieces that I produced again in 2007. Some jewelry. These are jewelry that you put between the fingers. So you have to hold them, and half of it is below the fingers and half of it is above. The beauty mirror, because we have some accessories as well. It's mainly a lighting brand, Michael Anastassiades, but we do have some accessories, as you can see here. The ball lights. Sorry for the speed, but there's quite a lot of slides there, and I'd like to leave time for discussion. The tubular light here, and the angle lights. I mean, my philosophy behind all these pieces that I create is to actually derive those qualities of what makes a piece timeless. And this is what interests me, because I don't see designing a product for a limited period of time or for now. I'm seeing a product to live for a long time, and for me to discover those qualities and what makes an object timeless is the biggest challenge. And as Mark mentioned, it was through this process of reduction, taking away information layer after layer, and you make the object richer, actually. These are the mirror glasses, some ball vases, in the shape of bowling balls, and these are cast bronze pieces where you put a flower in, the faceted table, and meditation stools, because this was my contribution to another side of me, which is the yoga. I was a yoga instructor for 15 years while I was building up my brand, and this helped me greatly trying to keep my mind together throughout this process. So some champagne glasses with Studio Ilse Crawford. We did a collaborative work together, and then some of the newest mobile chandeliers, and the newest collection that we launched about a couple of years ago in Milan. So we use usually the Euroluce every 2 years to launch new products, and this was in the last fair that we did. This is called Floating Forest. It's a very interesting project. It's an experimental project. The idea, I was very fascinated. I wanted to suspend an acorn in water. I mean, I think this is quite common, these acorn vases in Sweden and Scandinavian countries, but I wanted to find a more poetic way of displaying the acorn and growing, let's say, your mini forest in your home. So you can see the different elements that we have there, the cone, the flat disc, and even some of the mobiles. So you have to, because as it grows, it becomes heavier, so you have to move the ball along and slide the ball along the mobile in order to grow it. This is like a paper clip that simply clips on the edge of the water. This was 2011, was my first ever presentation at Euroluce. And at the same year, I did this collection at Palazzo Durini. It was a limited edition light fixtures for Nilufar Gallery. And this is where I met Floss. It was my first ever sort of partnership. It was in 2011 we started working together. It was very interesting. I met the owner, Mr. Gandini, and we quickly had a meeting in a taxi, and I showed him a project, and it's very much what you see here. It was actually the string lights. It became our first ever collaboration, which is very much inspired from strings and how you see strings in architecture and how they define space. As you can see, suspended between buildings or even joining pylons, and they're perfectly sort of parallel to each other, and they form this grid. So the way that you actually mark your space, even translating that into the interior environment and marking your space, creating architecture, but at the same time being transparent. So this was the whole concept and the spirit of this string lights. This is a photo shoot we did in Milan. These are some configurations of what you can do with it. And everything is flexible, so you can actually, unhook all these endless string, and you wind it, and you just simply pack the object. So, as you can see, all these possibilities. And we did a presentation in my own home in London, so you can see some of the pictures are just shared interiors with different light fixtures. And a presentation we did in Milan a year later, in 2014, creating this interesting interior in the store in Milan. Another installation at the Broil Tower in Belgium, in Kortrijk, during the fair. And then the same interior with the IC lights, which was another collection that I designed in the same year that you can see here. This was an interesting project because I think it was interesting for me in actually looking at an object that was very much, or a language that was very much established through my own brand, but I wanted to see it realized in a different scale, and that has been an amazing exercise and success as well for this collection. The copycat is a meeting of two spheres, just a simple light fixture, and interestingly, it's an LED lamp, and the metal sphere is actually used for a heat sink, which is a great way to resolve that problem. Captain Flint, which is just out in the market now, launched in 2015. This one, still on the go, it's called Notch. It's a very interesting light. It's a pendant, because I like this play on words. What is a pendant is something that is a light that hangs from the ceiling, but at the same time is something that you put around your neck. So for me, this double meaning behind the word is what gave me the inspiration to make this piece. Long before that, I did this kind of small projects, but we're more like tapping into this technical expertise and history of these beautiful companies that are around. Like, this is a collaboration I did with Lobmeyer and his series of lamps. It's called Captured. It's a glass-making company in Austria, very historical, and you can see the cut crystal sphere in the middle. You can cut different patterns, and these patterns somehow create those interesting shadows on the wall. Another collaboration with Nilüfer Gallery that we produced for a little while, called Tree in the Moonlight. This is a shelf for co-edition. And a small sofa for two for SCP. It's kind of more like a lounge piece for a waiting room, establishing some privacy for you to speak on the phone, or even not having to be exposed completely to your surroundings somehow. And this is called Sommelier, this collection of wine tasting objects for Puy-Forcat. It's a beautiful silverware company, historical again, that belongs to Hermès. And as you can see, there's this ritual of these solid silver bases, and these glasses that sit on the bases. So it's all the ritual of wine serving, art de la table, and also tasting, as you can see here. This was launched last year. Different objects like the champagne bucket, the decanter, and the glasses. And this is Vance 10. This was another beautiful project. It was an homage to Joseph Frank. It was about 4 years ago. It was called To Be Perfectly Frank. It was in their Stockholm showroom. And as you can see here, I suspended all these plants that were actually plants that I identified from a particular textile of Joseph Frank. So this is actually forming the textile, but in 3D. And then I use some of my objects in the space. I design a lamp, or a few lamps for them that you can see, flight there, and then the one in the front. And these cabinets, which again inspired from the Joseph Frank chair, which is this bamboo structure where you can put inside your plants. And these tables, they are in the shape of archipelago islands. And so we chose different islands from the Stockholm archipelago. The valet that you see there is a butler, where you hang your coat. This is a commission I did for a Greek Orthodox church in London. It's inspired very much by the architecture of the church. It was done about 12 years ago. It's a building that belongs to English Heritage in London, and it was built by an English architect in 1850. What was interesting about this project was that they never really had all the money to complete that project. So they did this project over a period of 100 years. And every time they would make an addition, rather than making the addition in the style of when it was actually built, they decided to make a contemporary addition. So when they asked me to design these chandeliers, they wanted something clearly contemporary. And this was a very good approach, I guess, to the project, and that's what attracted me there. I mean, one of the biggest compliments I ever got for this project was that friends of mine that do often go to that church, I told them once that, oh, you went to that church, did you see my chandeliers? And they said no. So that was the biggest compliment. So I like the idea that it actually, design should disappear. You know, you should feel so comfortable with its presence that you actually forget it later. And then maybe after a few times that you see it over and over again, you start noticing it. A commission in a museum in Cyprus, the Leventis Museum, and there's a big installation, 2 minutes will run. Another interesting exhibition we did with Floss in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Shortly before, a pendulum that you see here. It's a giant pendulum that is a light that was installed in the music room. This one, same show in Vienna at the MAC, in this place called Guy Müller-Schlosser, with some melting mirrors. And I designed the whole installation for this. Presentation during Design Festival in an old jewellery store in London. It was Victorian jewellery store, and I put all these lights in these glass cabinets. And you can see all these magic reflections from these interiors. I'm sorry, I'm speeding you through an installation in Brussels to celebrate the Cyprus presidency. And it was interesting because shortly afterwards it was the economic collapse in Cyprus. And this was supposed to be the boat or the underside of a boat that led Europe to the future. So it wasn't that successful. Miracle chips, these marble carved wafers, I would say. They're quite large objects. They're about 80 centimeters diameter. And these are in the quarry in Versilia. It was an experimental project I did with wallpaper. And then shortly afterwards, I designed all these marble textures and patterns for the same company called Enro. This is our presentation in Chersaye. An exhibition I did in Cyprus a few years ago. It's called Reload the Current Page, exploring a different level of anxiety for the Cypriots through the presence of the Turkish occupation, the financial sort of collapse, and different things. I think these pieces require a little bit more explanation, which you're happy to read over onto the website. But you can see they're pieces inspired by the landscape the local landscape, installation at Brioni, using their craftsmanship, and then another interesting exhibition in Istanbul for Rodeo Gallery, and this is where the idea we started doing the extra with Floss, which was launched this year. So some shells that suspend through the balls from the wall. 2013, 2015 in Euroluce, and this is my future studio in London. This is a small exhibition I did when I got this space. It's an old garage, and we'll be moving there in about a couple of months. It's going to be an exciting chapter for me, because also the brand and the company is 10 years old this year. So these are some pieces that I did called One Well-Known Sequence. An exhibition in Dance Mobile Kunst. It's a gallery in Paris. It's a special installation I did in their gallery in last April, with some of my objects and some of their classicals objects, as you see the Bruno Madsen daybed there, creating this surreal setting. And then finally this presentation I did for Herman Miller last Salone with these stools that I designed for them. And the name of the exhibition was The Double Dream of Spring. And that brings us to now. And thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking up so much time. And maybe we can speak with Mark.
Yes, thank you. Have a seat.
Thank you.
Care for a glass of water?
No, I'm okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's concentrate on light. What is it that you're most interested in? Is it the actual light, what it does to us, or is it the lamp and the sculptural qualities?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because the way you separate the two, because I think this is what makes a light object unique and very different than any other object. I mean, it's very much a sculptural form that you perceive when a light is off. So it has all these sculptural qualities of the materiality of it, but then it's a completely different scenario when the light is on, because suddenly it starts occupying a different space. So the actual glow of the light itself, the shadows that it casts with relation to other objects around it. So it has that duality, which I think is what fascinates me about light, whereas a furniture piece is a chair or anything else, or you know, like an object that you put on a table doesn't have those qualities. So that's a very poetic medium at the same time. So
it is, isn't it? And of course, the light is turned off most of the time, really, isn't it? It's this object which is standing in the room. And that has often been lost in lighting design, hasn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you have to really acknowledge the sculptural qualities of the object when it's off, but it has to tell you something else when it's actually on. And this is a challenge when you address light.
How do you, in practicality, try out the light quality?
I start from the light quality. For me, that's really, really important. I'm very much into the glow of light, into the warmth of the light. And if you see the early pieces that I designed were very much around the actual incandescent light bulb, which produced a beautiful illumination. It was interesting because I started working with the light bulbs, and then suddenly, pretty much immediately afterwards, I started discontinuing them. So it was a little bit of a disaster as an experiment, especially wanting to make a commercial project, or a commercial product. So I was interested in the physical presence of the light bulb, which obviously it's not the case anymore with LED technology and the way that technology is generally moving.
But now you do produce your own light bulbs in a way, don't you?
Well, a lot. I mean, what has been interesting with the partnership with Floss is that side of how do you address again that those qualities and the glow that it's always in search of the perfect glow. How do you address that quality in these limitations? I wouldn't call them limitations because it's actually a completely different chapter for me, and that's what allows me to explore that technologically keep on reminding myself that this is what I should be looking for. So it's...
The lighting world is an almost overly academic world, isn't it? It's all about watts and lumen and light strength, and it seems to me as if you're kind of stealing it back to a light which is something you gather around, or which is much more of a poetic addition to the home.
Of course, I come from probably the second part of things, but as you establish a company, you obviously have to satisfy certain requirements, certain illumination requirements,
yes.
Especially when you work with architects in architectural projects. And unfortunately, there's these codes that you have to operate under, and this is something I had to learn, but it's not something I'm naturally drawn into.
No.
So I leave that to the experts usually to resolve. So
yes. I noticed that Mr. Piero Gandini is sitting here at the front row. How do you decide on which products to pitch to Floss or which products to keep in your company?
I don't decide. For me, the idea is that I have a very free platform to work and allow the work to come out. And it's very much a very informal partnership in that way. If I think that a product is suitable for Floss just because there's an interesting sort of technological involvement in the product that I need only a company with such expertise can actually resolve. Because you have to imagine that my own brand is a very small boutique brand, and therefore we don't have that capacity of coming out with a highly technological product. So it's very free. So it's a discussion. It's a discussion that happens with myself and Mr. Gandini, and I don't really mind under who this product gets realized. At the end of the day, the importance for me is that it actually does get realized. And in many scenarios, when we realize throughout the way that this might not end up being a suitable Floss product, then there is
always room
in my own company. So there's that constant sharing of ideas that is interesting. It's very they support each other, and I think that's for me fundamental in building up relationships with brands.
I've heard that the lighting industry in Italy is very protective of their designers, that you're working with Floss. Does that make it impossible for you to work with Luceplan, for example? Or
I have no interest in putting my signature in every single brand in the world. I think the world is big enough, and there's a lot of designers out there to share that market. So for me, it's... As long as it's like being in a marriage. If you're happy in your marriage, you stay in your marriage. If you're not happy in your marriage, then you leave your marriage and you look for something else. So why should I look for something different if I find this an interesting platform under which I can operate? So.
Yes. And what are you looking for in a client?
I'm looking for communication and really sharing that excitement and that idea. And this is for me fundamental, because as a designer, you often feel frustrated that nobody really understands you. You know, especially you have this moment where you do a little sketch or scribble or something, and you want to share it with somebody, and it feels so limiting, the fact that it has to go through a long process to be communicated in a clear way and passed on to the person. So a beautiful relationship is one where you can actually show that sketch, that first sketch, and say, what do you think? And then you get an answer back and saying, this is great, let's do it. I think this is magical, and this is what I value in a partnership.
And that lack of understanding, which is something you can sometimes find in clients, of course, that was one of the reasons why you started your own company, to gain that artistic freedom, I suppose.
Absolutely. It was out of frustration, but it was a blessing in disguise at the end of the day, because I did try to follow that role model of a designer that should design for industry and should design for companies and strike, deals with companies and start building a portfolio of different works with these companies. For me, it was very different because I never really had that much exposure into that world. I tried it. I did knock at doors. None of them opened, or even the ones that semi-opened closed back in my face.
Why was that, do you think?
Not the right timing, maybe not the right maturity. Probably the most important thing is not the right communication. It's the communication that I'm referring to that I shared with you earlier about how do you know that it is the right partner? How do you know it's the right combination? Is through that moment where you can actually share your ideas and share the excitement behind your ideas. So if I found that all I was doing is I was hitting a wall, I said there's only one way of going ahead, is I need to produce. I need to get my ideas out. No matter how successful they become, I need to communicate these ideas, and that's what actually got me started on my own company.
And one of the persons who encouraged you was Bijoy Jain, the Indian architect who was a mutual acquaintance of ours. What did he tell you?
Well, I started traveling in India, and it was interesting because he discovered that world out of, again, not having a choice, out of no choice, because he ended up in India as a trained and talented architect, and he couldn't find anybody around him to communicate his ideas. So the only way for him to do it was to actually build himself. He even became his own client. He built for himself and then slowly started building for friends. And his friends trusted him to build homes for them, beautiful homes. And this is how it started. So when I was going through all these dilemmas of sharing my stories, that I tried approaching so-and-so company and all I got is a negative answer, he said to me, why don't you make your own objects? And this is where I started, actually. I started making a lot of these products in India and using my time there to outsource some of the production.
Your objects are so reduced in its different components. They've got a strong presence still, but they're very reduced. You must have been in a position where you sometimes ask yourself, have I reduced this too far?
I think there's never too far. I mean, as you said before, you reach the point that if you take one more thing out, the object disappears. And I think what you've got to understand is that moment. And it requires quite extensive training, I think, to realize that the information that you decided to leave is what is needed to bring that idea across. I mean, it's interesting because you take away all these layers of information, but at the same time, you are adding a different structure, of layers through meaning and depth. And so that's actually what makes an object acquire those timeless qualities.
Yeah, could you give an example of what it is you're adding?
Well, I think that an object that only has one meaning or one layer is doomed to become a gimmick. You create something, you have a smart idea, it makes you smile as a first sort of reaction, you see it, and that's it. If that's what you actually say through that first impression, the object is finished. There's no future for that object. I mean, an object should actually, you should go back to that object and keep on looking for layers of not information in this case, but layers with relation to the quality, questioning the materiality, questioning the form, questioning all these kind of issues. And of course, one fundamental thing is proportion, because for me, that is something that is so important. You know, we are human beings after all. You know, we relate to scale. You know, the idea of having something of the right proportion, I think, is fundamental, because we live in confined spaces, environments, unless, you know, you work in a different scale of spaces.
And that quality that you add when taking away, that's what adds timelessness to the object, you mean?
It does. It's a specific, you know, is one of the formulas that, you know, I apply in a way, is one of the exercises that I put myself through in order to arrive to that result.
Thank you for this. The time is up, I'm afraid. So
thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for coming and listening.
Thank you.